I really love presenting in alt space. I just think it's so fun and be expressive and also not have to find shoes that match our dress. So I love to be here. Thank you all again. And I'm sorry for that little bit in the beginning. I'm not sure what was going on with that headset, but thankfully I brought a spare. So we're all set. So if we can go ahead to the next slide, we'll get started. Okay, great. So just a little bit about me. What we're going to do today, let me just tell you that first. What we're going to do today is we have a short amount of time, and really many of these things we could talk about for hours and hours, days and days. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some information. Really, the bottom line is the most important aspects really are that we are in an amazing time when we have technology such as VR, anything in XR, available to us to be used in mental health treatments. And for me, it is very exciting. I've been using it in my office clinically for a little over a decade. And I just think the possibilities are really endless. We're talking about highly immersive. I know you all know this, you're here, right? But we're talking about highly immersive, engaging, motivating environments that can be customized, that can be really fit to what our clinical needs for our clients slash patients are. And that is a time that is different than really the entire history of where we've been, particularly in mental health treatment. If you imagine, even currently people are doing it this way historically, I would say to you, okay, let's imagine your safe place. Let's imagine what that looks like, what that feels like, what that sounds like. And you imagine it in your head. And then you are somehow going to translate that to me verbally, or you're going to draw it, or we're going to find some sort of picture that might be close. I'm then going to translate it in my own head into what I think you are intending, and then we're going to operate on that. There are a lot of places in there where things can get lost. Again, I'm speaking to the preaching to the choir here because you're all here, but the idea that we don't have to do all that translating and all that imagining. We really can be in a space that depicts what that person wants to depict. And the further we go in development, the further we recognize these powers, then the more I believe we're going to have of this translation being a place that we can share together, that the client can really express what it is they need to create it, interact with it, say what they need to say. You have things you need to say to a particular person in your life. You can role play that, you can say it, and you can experience it. For those of you who have read VR on Demand by Jeremy Bailenson, then you know that there's a tremendous amount of work and research that's been done in the whole process of translation from the experiential of doing and experiencing it to remembering it, to generalizing it to our existence from our and whatever we're doing day to day. There's so much power in this, and I just get really excited about what the possibilities are. So a little bit about me. I am a licensed psychologist in the US, registered play therapist supervisor, play specialist, which means that I have a specialty in working with neurodivergent clients. I've written some things and I speak about things, and I've also developed a program called the Virtual Sandtray, specifically for use in session with clients. Next slide, please. Thank you. If you're interested in more reading of what I've put out there, here are a couple of the publications that I have out there. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the universality of play. Typically what gets conjured up is the idea of children and they're playing with some type of play materials, Legos, puppets, dollhouse, whatever it might be. And really, I would like all of us to expand that definition of play, because as adults we play, kids, older people, babies, anywhere in between. all across the ages. Play is cross-cultural, it's cross-language. We are able to interact with people in playful ways in more than the traditional sense. And so when thinking about that, then it's important for us to think about, well, what really is play? Because if we're going to try to expand it and translate it into something else, then it's important that we understand what it even is. Next slide, please. So I put here some 8 distinctive characteristics of play that have been defined by some of our foremost play therapists. And in this, we can see that there are a lot of components to it, and they are cross age group, developmental, cultural, and language. That we are wanting, we have a motivation to engage in the play. Hopefully there is fun to it, but as we know in therapy, some of the things we do are not always fun, but hopefully there is some fun to it. We're looking for different effects in there. We want active involvement. We want there to be flexibility. It doesn't have to be exactly what's in front of us. It can mold and change. It can be metaphoric. All kinds of different things that go into this idea of play. Next slide, please. In play therapy, specifically, we needed to have a really well thought through definition of what it means, because we don't want to, there's a saying in play therapy that there's a difference between just playing, and I have my hands up in air quotes, versus play therapy. And part of that distinction is that there's a trained professional who has a foundation in the play theories and theoretical foundations, that then they're applying those components and aspects to the interaction. So it brings playing, which has meaning and importance in and of itself, to a whole nother level where you're utilizing it to understand somebody. How do they approach the world? How do they think of themselves? How do they feel about interpersonal relationships? How people treat each other? What happens out there in the world and also within ourselves? So there are a lot of different aspects to this that go into play therapy. A couple of years ago, I started thinking about, okay, how do we translate those components into the digital realm? I really found so much value in utilizing digital tools in the therapeutic process, not only because of the customizability of it, as I was talking about earlier, and that interactive component of it, but also to really learn so much about people, as I was just saying, of how they approach the world and how they see themselves in it. So in that, I tried to narrow it down into a definition of play therapy regarding specific digital use, and that we're using these highly motivating immersive activities to incorporate areas of the client's interest. If your client is already interested in anything that has to do with digital, and you find that there's therapeutic value in that, what a great pairing, right? Because you're already so much further ahead. You can learn things about them, interact with them, do whatever interventions are important, and they want to be part of that because they already have a motivation to be involved in it because they have interest in whatever that topic might be. And so we're gathering that information, we're deepening our relationships, and then we're advancing that treatment plan forward. All right, next slide. And of course, this can include all sorts of different hardware and software. Okay. We have some tenets of digital play therapy. Really importance here is to know that there's a foundation to this and that there are very important components to include. And the 5 C's that I've included: competence, comfort, culture, congruency, and capability. Really, we're talking about know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Think that through, become competent, do trainings, utilize the hardware and the software, vet these products and these programs for their appropriateness in play therapy. And we achieve that through the practice, use, education, consultation, and supervision. Next slide, please. As we all know, with great power must also come great responsibility. So that's one of the reasons we're here during this week and this incredible event, is to understand that we must take into consideration how this affects our clients, how this affects the therapeutic process, what may need to be mediated, changed, understood further, researched, etc. How do we incorporate our ethics and guidelines into the process of all of this and really focus on um, providing highest quality services we can for our clients? Next slide, please. All right, next slide. So what we want to do is really to not only give voice to the fact that we need to pay attention to our ethics. Yes, of course we do, because that's what we do as clinicians, but also to understand what that even means. And certainly the do no harm while we're doing good. But we also have to think, so how does that actually manifest? How does it end up that we are able to take our fundamental tenets and foundations and translate them into a different medium, whatever that might be? When we're doing that, we need to break down those definitions of what are the ethical responsibilities we have that have to do with our licensure, with our boards, etc., but also within our field of being able to say, okay, what does it mean to not do any harm to my client? We want to pursue the knowledge about all of these components that we have identified and think about what the purpose and the mechanics of the intervention, why we're using it, how it's going to help our client get to whatever it is their therapeutic goal or what you've set for them. And then we need to vet these interventions. Can't think of all of this, and I'm not saying any of you are, but as a field, we can't think of this as, oh, we're just going to use this really cool new thing and everyone's just going to love it and be involved. We want to make sure that there are therapeutic foundations to that. Next slide, please. So as I said, we want to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it seems like such a simple statement. It just is at the core of everything we do. And whether you're doing it digitally or otherwise, knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it really is the core of everything that we should be thinking about and doing when we're using any tools, but in particular XR, because we are embarking on something very exciting and very expansive and new, but at the same time, there are things that aren't known about this to us and to others. Here, these people who are in the room and potentially people who are watching elsewhere, they are really people, you all are people who are thinking about these things and are already, they're on the cusp or on the forefront or well into utilizing this on a day-to-day basis. But there is a vast number of professionals who aren't even close to that. So how do we as a group, the people who are on the forefront, how do we confirm, explore, define, etc., what it means to move forward in a clinically appropriate way? Next slide, please. So we have to think about protections, right? Certainly for our clients and our patients, also for ourselves as the clinicians. I'm a very strong advocate for thinking all these parts through. What about when you have friends lists on any given device? If you have a friends list, most likely they're public, most likely other people will be able to see them. So we have to think about, how do we protect that? And one of the easiest ways, not that it's always easy, but easiest, is to friend and unfriend people, our clients, so that we can utilize the interaction in the time if it's needed to be friends, and then we can separate that so that our connection and communication is kept private. As clinicians, we also want to make sure we have the ability to keep our private lives separate, right? Because we all are allowed to have our own lives and our own interests and our own things that we do. So it's important that we think of ourselves too. So I am also a strong advocate of creating profiles, accounts, usernames, everything that are professional and keep that separate from your personal. And we also want to keep the client and clinician relationship to be private as well, right? So we're not only thinking about ourselves and our clients on personal levels, their information, et cetera, but we're also protecting and want to protect that communication and the interaction between us. Next slide, please. So a few potential features that we want to think about, and hopefully if any of you are developers here in the room, if you are acquainted with different developers, to start thinking about clinical adoption. What we really need is private spaces. Right? We need to increase private servers, have places that we can go into together with client or clients, say if you're doing group therapy, et cetera, and be able to know that that is encrypted, it is private, other people aren't going to come in, other people aren't going to be able to hear what our interactions are. We want to also allow for private friends lists, so we don't have to do that whole gymnastics I was just talking about of friending and unfriending. And then to also talk about encrypted chat in these private servers so that our conversations are recorded, that you have in the United States, what we call a BAA, a business associate agreement, that allows us to know that the key parts of our HIPAA laws are being respected and incorporated into the work, and that we can have a more free and open space to be able to work with our clients. I would to this more ability for customized environments. I'm a huge advocate of having libraries, distribution libraries, programs that are specifically utilized in mental health. So we have a lot of work that we can do, but all these things need to be defined. And so some of what is so exciting about this week that we have here is having these conversations and all of us thinking, what can we do? What part of this can we have that will help to define these, help bring new products, new programs into play so that we can utilize these in the best way we can in therapy. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a quick case example here. One of the things that I have found to be hard about presenting, even though I love it so much in AltspaceVR, is there's no clock. So it'd be really great if we had a clock. We could see the time here. But I'll give this quick case study here. So I had a client who is, and I'm going to sanitize this all over the place so it's not identifiable, but I'll give you the key components. She had come into me with a lot of anxiety, depression, and some social issues, potentially on the spectrum. And she really was having a lot of difficulty defining what a safe space meant for her, how she could like re-regulate herself. So what I mean by that is she would feel really flustered and out of control. She wouldn't be quite to panic attack, but her breathing would be accelerated and she would be getting really upset. It would be hard to speak and hard to interact and hard to bring herself back down to a level that was more comfortable for her. And so we did a lot of work in traditional play therapy of trying to draw it, of depicting it in different scenes, build it with different building materials in the playroom. And we really tried to explore all those kinds of things, have her lay down. What does it sound like? What does it look like? What color is it? And so we weren't really getting anywhere. And I said, would you want to try virtual reality? Might that be helpful to you? So I don't know, it sounds cool. So put her into the headset. And I just want to be really clear that all of this is in my informed consent. These are conversations I've had with the parents. It is known what we're doing and why we're doing it, both by myself and also by the parent. We go into virtual reality and I have her use a program that is not designed specifically for therapeutic use, but nature tracks. And she goes in there, and for those of you who are familiar, you know what I mean, but if those of you who aren't, you go and you have different panels of environments that you can choose to go into. And then you can explore around in the world and you can also customize it to a point by putting in trees and flowers and rocks and butterflies, and change the lighting, and in some even the weather. And so she chooses the environment that she identifies would be comfortable and happy for her. So she goes to a certain spot, she transports around, finds a spot, and starts creating a safe place around her. Places trees and rocks, and really encloses herself in. And she's looking around, and she puts some butterflies up and does all of this. And then she lays down physically on the floor in my office. So I just want to remind you that this is a highly anxious, depressed preteen who is pretty hyper vigilant. Any noise in the office startles her. Anything that is out of the ordinary. If I move the trash can over a little bit, she notices these things. So this is someone who is not easily relaxed. She lays down on my floor on her own choice, and she falls asleep. She completely fell asleep. And I was like, wow, that's not just relaxed, that's feeling safe, secure, obviously tired as well. But this was very, very different behavior on her part. And so I let her be there for a little bit just to see what she would do and what would happen. And at some point I needed to wake her, so I gently woke her up. And she said, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, you fell asleep." She said, "I can't believe that I did that." I said, "I know." So what we did is we started to define and explore what that safety meant to her. How did that feel safe to you? What about what you had created around yourself created this sense that was so secure for you that you could fall asleep on my floor? And so we started to define that. We defined the colors, defined the sounds, and the feeling of having that security around her, but also an ability to escape if she needed. And so when we defined all of that, then we went through the process of, well, how can you recreate that in other environments? And so what she did is she went home and she was able to create a corner of her room that mimicked that. Colors included a lot of greens because she went into that green meadow area in nature treks. And so she used green, she enclosed herself in, but still gave herself an out. She recreated the music that we had playing. And you know that after that, she ended up moving away. And we did some Zoom sessions, so some telemental health sessions after that. And so I was able to see in her room, and here she is in a completely different environment, different home, and she also recreated it again. That's how meaningful it was to her to identify and to have that space. And she recreated it in her new home and was able to ship it to me because we were doing telemental health, which was one of the big bonuses of that. So that's just one example. I have many examples, as I'm sure many of you do as well, of the power of this. Just to even take something that seems so simple. Again, I'm doing some air quotes here. So simple to say, what's your safe space? Sometimes that's not so easy to define. And giving our clients the tools to be able to explore this kind of um, concern, issue, or topic, as well as many, many others, giving them the ability to explore that, the safety to explore it without outside world consequences, to try things, to fail, to try again, to figure out cause and effect, to problem solve. So amazingly powerful for our clients. So in giving them all of this ability and tools, we have to pair that with how do we keep it safe? How do we keep them safe? How do we make sure that clinicians, even though we aren't going to all come from the same foundations, how do we make sure that clinicians at least have a baseline of appropriateness and ethical behavior within these projects that we're doing and these tools that we're using? Next slide, please. So I think there's a couple clicks on this one because it was animated, but really we all want to feel heard, accepted, understood. And that, I think, fundamentally, I did see your hand up, just so you know. I'll Yeah, I'll address that in just a moment. Um, I think fundamentally as human beings that's what we want in life, in our interpersonal relationships. And so we want to have that be mirrored in our therapeutic rapport, relationship, and experience. Next slide, please. Yep, just keep going. A couple words are going to pop up for you. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks so much. All right, next slide. Okay, here is my information. If you want to get a hold of me, if you further, happy to do that. I saw a couple friend requests come through, so I'll certainly accept those, and then we can be connected in here. Sir, over there, let's see. Yi, did you have a question? I saw a hand come up, and I didn't know if it was intentional.